afternoon all. On behalf of Knowledge Consortium of Gujarat, I, Harshit Derasri, welcome you all in this first session of online faculty development program on physics. So, let me introduce to our today's lecturer, that is Dr. U.S. Joshi sir, who is a faculty in the Gujarat University in physics department. I also welcome to our coordinator, Professor P.N. Gajjar sir, and thanking him to giving such a great faculty. Our today's topic is on the electronic diffraction, a powerful tool for nanotechnology. Handing over to you, sir.
So my lecture will be about electron diffraction. Prior to that, formally, since this is going to be the first lecture, you may wonder that what is going on in this. There are several faculty members who will be engaging in this particular FDP program in physics. Several FDPs have already been organized earlier in different subjects, and now it is for physics. And I am the opening batsman in this particular FDP, Faculty Development Program. Already, I can see some of the faces which I think familiar to me. They are already developed, so no need of doing kind of a development. I don't know how much development can this program can make, but most of us are developed as far as the content is concerned, and we justify our content, whatever we teach at whatever the institute. So I'll take you to this small presentation on electron diffraction basically, and some of the things that we do in our research as well, but it is more like a technique rather than research results. So just pardon me if you find that some of the things are not very advanced level, but of course there are so many things that is new learning in this particular lecture which you will come across, and rather I keep on speaking and showing some of the slides. I would also wish that there can be some kind of an interaction so that we can exchange in the knowledge. Yeah. So I'm going to speak about something very, very elementary, that is basic, that is electron diffraction, which is actually nowadays very popular in characterization of the nanomaterials, particularly two-dimensional materials, which is thin films. And I shall speak about how this electron diffraction has, although very, very old technique like X-ray diffraction, but still it is very powerful for characterization of nanomaterials and useful widely in subject of nanotechnology. As already introduced, I am Utpal Joshi, working as a professor in Department of Physics, School of Sciences in Gujarat University here. So let me, before I enter into the topic, I would just like to give you some brief idea about the developments which are taking place in the electronics. So if you go back and, the first discovery of the transistors, which was happened in 1948 at the Bell Labs, if you look at the dimension of a first transistor, this is actual photograph taken from the museum of Bell Labs. So if you see that, it is quite a big, several inches in size from in all three dimensions. The first integrated circuit came up in 1958 by Texas Instruments, and that was shown in the middle diagram. So it was not even the small scale integration, it was even before that. We know that in 1969 formally the Intel was founded, and in this Intel Corporation, in Gordon Moore has founded that, and there we can see that the small scale integration started during that time. So what I will do is taking you to the journey of this miniaturization which is happening and how this electron diffraction is useful in that. The third picture that you see at the right hand side here is the Intel Pentium 4 processor, and which was developed in year 2000. So if you look only the electronics developments, which are miniaturization, we can see starting from the first transistor, whatever the size that it was occupying, if you look at these processors, you have millions of transistors occupying almost at the, so during this 1948 to 2000, during this journey, developments in electronics have happened in a whatever the best magnitude you can say, which has actually changed our completely, human life. Whatever the small scale integration started, and after that, if you see the transistor scaling in this graph, it is year versus the technology generation, which are in the micrometer size. You see, we are in the size of the virus. Okay, nowadays this virus is a very, very common word that we are aware of. They are less than micrometer size. So if we see that the transistor scaling which have happened during past about 5 to 6 decades has been enormous. And that is the reason why, because of this development which have taken place in the thin film technology, which I'll elaborate it more in detail. Now, the integrated circuits, if you see, it is actually, several generations of ICs have been invented earlier. Okay, the first SSI contained only 10 number of transistors per chip. Now, when I say one chip, that means it is 1 inch of silicon wafer, and 1 inch of silicon wafer is about 2.54 centimeter. So 10 transistors were sitting in the small scale integration. If you look at the medium scale integration, it contains about 100 number of transistors. In LSI, it is 10 to the power 4. In VLSI, about more than 10 to the power 4, it is about 10 to the power 5 or so number of transistors that you have on 1 inch of silicon wafer. And we are right now living into the era of ultra large scale integration, where it is about 10 to the power 7 number of transistors are sitting on 1 inch of silicon wafer. So now, naturally, if I try to find out, how much space that I'm giving to one transistor, so you can just make a simple arithmetic. 2.54 centimeter divided by 10 to the power minus 7. So if you forget about 2.54, we are already into the 10 to the power minus 7 centimeter. So that is obviously we are into the sub-micrometer region, where in sub-micrometer you have emitter, base and collector. So because it is 3-terminal device. So usually in the IC technologies, BJTs are not used. Bipolar junction transistors are not used. What is used is the FET, field effect transistors. So basically it is a 3-terminal device. You have source, drain and gate. So the one particular transistor FET requires about a space of 10 to the power minus 7 centimeter, or in other words, sub-micrometer, 0.1 micrometer, that is the available size for that. So that is, huge kind of, you can say, the miniaturization which has happened, and various logic families such as TTL and CMOS have been developed, and our entire electronics technology, ULSI technology, is based on the complementary metal oxide transistors, semiconductors. So that is FET, field effect transistors only. So, what I want to convey to you here is the developments which have taken place in this. Now, the developments actually were first predicted by Gordon Moore. This name, Gordon Moore, is not new. Actually, he is the founder of Intel Corporation, which predicted actually that the number of transistors that can be integrated into a particular silicon wafer would double every 18 to 14 months. So, and that is, extremely faithfully obeyed this particular law, which was empirical, purely empirical role. And then you can see that from the Intel website, it is taken from 1969. You have 4,000 number of transistors were sitting, and now into the era where about 1 billion transistors are sitting on a chip. So, and then if you look at this, divide this particular journey and various generations of Pentium processors which have happened, it is actually obeying this Gordon Moore's law, which is very popular in electronics. That is, number of transistors which can be integrated, it will be double every year. So till 2005, this rule is actually faithfully obeyed by the industries. But now there are certain issues. I shall highlight that also a little bit. Okay, now motivation of this particular lecture is, basically it is all developments are taking place because of the developments which have happened in the two-dimensional materials. And when you say two-dimensional materials, it is the thin film research. It is important and interesting from both the point of view. from the physics point of view as well as from the industry point of view. From the physics point of view, you can develop new materials, right? And then you can find the new effect like colossal magnetoresistance effect, quantum Hall effect, and tunneling magnetoresistance, which are actually very, very innovative and very high-end applications, which can actually put our life at much more ease when they come into practicals. Also, they are low-dimensional systems, and in industry, these particular research is very important. Why? Because you require very, very less material. About milligram of material can do the wonders. Because of this low material and low space, it has extremely low power consumption. So this, CPUs of our any device or gadget that we use, they are basically very, very low power consumption, and that is because the developments in the thin films, which actually takes very less material to operate. And new technologies such as thin film transistors, these processor units and the dynamic random access memory, all these things are beneficial in terms of the industrial developments which are taking place in the thin film research. Okay, now if you look at the thin film growth techniques, there are several techniques. Some of them I have listed here. There are two techniques which are non-vacuum techniques, you can call it as. Basically, they are the solution processing methods, spin coating and dip coating, which are basically depends on the much more on the chemistry, self-assembly and the chemical reactions. So you work with basically with the solutions. But in most of the thin film high-end applications in electronics, basically you require the other sophisticated techniques which requires very high vacuum, ultra high vacuum, which you call it as UHV, where the vacuum is beyond 10 to the power minus 7 torr or millibar in common our language. So that is the chemical vapor deposition. We call it as the CVD. Then you have the sputtering depositions, magnetron or DC sputtering. Then you have something called pulse laser deposition, PLD method. And most advanced is the molecular beam epitaxy, MB, where most of our devices which we use in our present life, okay, they are made up of. So, these are the some of the idea of how this thin film is useful and how one can grow it. Okay. Of course, the lecture is not intended for the thin film research, but it is for the technique that we use for characterization of the thin film materials. Now, just now I have pointed out that for any thin film preparation, ultra high vacuum is necessary. Okay, so I just now mentioned about the role of the ultra high vacuum that is required. I give you an idea in this particular slide, which is very important and close to my heart, because any student would understand that why without vacuum you cannot grow a good quality epitaxial thin film or any device. See, if we take a simple, one material, its volume density is about Avogadro number. So Avogadro number is about 10 to the power 23. And if you take any surface, it has 6 surfaces. So if we take one particular surface, on surface about 10 to 15 number of atoms are there per centimeter square. Now, if you want to make one monolayer of a material, then about 10 to the power 15 atoms per centimeter cube are required. Now, in this table, you can see on this column, the air pressure is written, different air pressure. So 10 to the power 3 millibar, air pressure is our ambient, right? When you have 10 to the power 0, 10 raised to minus 3 is something which you can achieve from the rotary pump. 10 raised to minus 6 you can achieve from diffusion pump. 10 raised to minus 9 you can achieve from the turbomolecular pump, and so on. So if you look at the particles density at this vacuum, you can see there is almost order of 10 decrement in the particle density with this vacuum. And the time required for any impurity to sit on your particular wafer is mentioned here. It's a monolayer time. So, in 10-second time only 10 raised to 19 number of atoms are deposited on a particular surface. If I create a vacuum of the order of using rotary pump with this 10 to the power minus 3 torr kind of a vacuum, then it requires 10 milliseconds for one particular layer to grow. But if I can take this entire thing to, using turbomolecular pump going into the UHV regime, actually it requires 3 hours for any impurity to settle down on a particular surface. So, if you create better vacuum, then the impurity doping or impurity addition layers, monolayer on the surface of the substrate would be very less. I mean, it would be very high, of course. It takes actually 3 hours. And this actually tells us that why high vacuum is required for thin film growth or deposition. Okay, now basically the thin films are, 2D materials. Basically the thin films are less than 100 nanometer in thickness. So we are now talking directly about the nanometer scale. So it is 1000 angstrom. So, for such a small thickness, self-standing is not possible because, it is such a small that it requires a support, right? Without support, this much of thickness of the material cannot be self-sustained. So, and that support is called the substrate. So we can call that the thin films are essentially two-dimensional growth of the materials. So along an A and B direction, the growth is there, and the C axis is negligible. So in the schematic diagram which is shown here, you can see the film is at the top and the substrate is a bulk material. But without substrate, the thin film cannot be grown. Okay, so this is important in case of the electronics also. So if you want to create some kind of a device based on silicon or gallium arsenide, 3-5 semiconductors, you require a suitable substrate. Without that, a film cannot be grown because the thickness of the film is such a small that it cannot be freestanding, right? It will collapse otherwise if you don't provide the substrate. So essentially, and then once you create the film, it cannot be detachable also from the substrate because it will make some kind of a bond at the substrate and the film interface. So this makes it, so when we say thin films, so we have to actually talk about the, substrate quality as well as the film quality both combined. Right. Now, just there are several steps in which the thin film growths are taking place. In fact, this requires actually 2 hours to explain how the thin film is grown. The blue color that you can see here, dots, is the substrate. It is also crystalline material. And the yellow ones which you see at the top is the evaporated material which is to be grown as a thin film. It can be silicon on silicon. It can be gallium arsenide on, let's say, indium gallium arsenide, which is a semiconductor laser, which all of us are using. So any material, as a matter of fact, has to first of all do the absorption. Then you have something called the surface diffusion. Then the chemical bond formation, which we call it as the chemisorption. Okay. Then you have a nucleation, which is created when the bonding of these molecules atom to atom will happen. Then you have a microstructure formation. So that is the crystallinity will improve in the step number 5. And then you have, along with the formation of the crystal structure, you have some kind of a defects also forming. And then you have the bulk changes which is happening. You can see the diffusion. The one particular, this yellow one has gone inside. Okay, so that is because of the diffusion which is happening because of this in the item number 6 here. Okay, so that is the diffusion process. So essentially, each of these 6 steps requires to be satisfied, and one need to give a time and temperature for a particular growth which has to happen on a substrate, suitable substrate. Now, making the thin films of high quality is something called the epitaxy. Right, this epitaxial word is very important as far as the thin film growth is concerned. See, epi means upon and taxis means layer. So it's a Greek word basically from the two. Epi means upon and taxis means layer. It's a single crystal quality film, and when you compare it with the bulk material, so it is like a single crystalline quality thin films. And if you prepare any transistor or any diode on the material, its mobility cannot be achieved unless and until it is epitaxially grown. So please make sure that the transistors and in the ICs which we are using, they are all epitaxial quality thin films of silicon. There are 2 silicon epitaxial methods. One is called the homoepitaxy, when the material is identical to that of the substrate. This means your substrate is also silicon and the material which you deposit on top of it, that is also silicon with slight impurity, so to make it p-type and n-type to prepare a particular device. But this material and the substrate are identical, that is called the homoepitaxy. And then you have something called heteroepitaxy, where you have the different materials of the film and the substrate. Now, you may ask a question that why it is required. See, if you don't have this kind of, the lattice matching between the substrate and your film, there are so many things which may happen. Okay, it will create some kind of a strain film, right? So it is like, epitaxial growth is something, so you have to have some kind of a strain, and that strain is AF minus AS upon AS, where AF is the lattice constant of the film material, AS is the lattice constant of the substrate material, and divide by AS. So that will give you the mismatch, lattice mismatch. And this lattice mismatch is going to actually make the thin film epitaxial growth somewhat inhibited. So one has to actually make sure that the lattice mismatch is very small as far as possible. Only then the epitaxial quality film can be grown. Okay. Now let me give you some analogy with this. Let us make an analogy. Suppose બધાએ તમે આપણે લોકોએ 26મી જાન્યુઆરીની પરેડ જોઈ હશે ક્યારેક ને ક્યારેક, બરાબર ને? કદાચ આ 26મી ના જોઈ પણ કોઈક જોઈ હશે પરેડ, રાઈટ? વિચાર કરો તમે કે in that marching of these soldiers, suppose 5 are pilot, પાયલોટ એટલે શું કે પહેલી લાઈનમાં જે એક દો કરીને માર્ચ કરતા હોય એ, બરાબર ને? હવે માની લો કે બાકી એક મોટું ટોળું છે, about 500 people which are randomly moving, right? Now suppose એ લોકોને બધાને એવો ઓર્ડર કરવામાં આવે કે after a particular whistle all of you need to follow the pilot. તો શું થશે તમે વિચાર કરો, એ જે whistle વાગશે એ પછી all these 500 will try to accommodate themselves behind that 5, no? એટલે આખું પેલા જે chaotic હતું એની બદલે આખું order થઈ જશે. And if you look at from the top, the entire march of 500 people, earlier there were 5, now 500 have joined. So these 505 people, if you see, you will find from the top that it is two-dimensional lattice structure. Because the distance between the left person and right person is equal, the distance between the one which is in front and the other one which is behind, that is also equal. So it is a two-dimensional lattice. Precisely exactly the same happens in case of the thin film growth. So what happens is the substrate is a very crystalline material. You can see in all these diagrams, these checks are shown. The black checks are the crystalline material of the substrate, and the blue checks that you see, they are of the thin film. So what happens? The material for the thin film are evaporated and going towards these pilots. These substrate atoms are pilot atoms, and they actually influence these atoms, thin film atoms, to deposit on top of it. And if you give sufficient temperature and the air pressure, or let's say vacuum, then this kind of mechanism of like marching of the soldier will happen, and every other atom will try to follow the previous one, and that's how the crystallinity in the two-dimensional will begin. And that is what you have in the epitaxial quality thin films. These are the application areas of thin film nanostructures. I don't have to tell you much about it because there is no area in which the thin film technology is not penetrated. You have whether it is a ball bearing where the coating is done, whether it is CD-ROM. Okay, on CD-ROM there is a ferromagnetic and anti-ferromagnetic layers. Subsequently there are 7 layers on CD. That is how it is writing. Okay, read and write operations are there. It is because of these consecutive layers of the anti-ferromagnetic and ferromagnetic layers. So, and then you have some kind of some bearings and other things where the coating is required. Drill machines, coatings are required. Of course, in all solar cells, you have anti-reflection coating because otherwise the light will come back. Whatever the solar radiation falls on it, it has to be efficiently absorbed. And if it is not absorbed efficiently, then your solar cell efficiency goes down. So you require some kind of anti-reflection coating. That is also thin film. Our bottles, water bottles, or even the packet of wafer, the inside part of Tetra Pak of Amul milk or buttermilk, okay, that is also thin film coated with some antibacterial kind of a material so that it can last longer. So hardly you can find any area around us which is actually free from any the applications of the thin films. Everywhere if you see, it is a two-dimensional growth of the materials, right? And that is why it is very interesting and to for the research to make it in not from the physics point of view but also from the point of view of the technology, right? Now now there are certain ways in which you can characterize. पहला आपने growth ની વાત કરી थी. Now I'll talk about the characterization of the thin films. Suppose somebody makes a thin film in the laboratory or in the industry, then he would like to definitely test the material, that how my film is, whether it is good quality or bad quality. There are two ways in which you can do. One is the surface. Surface is very important as far as the thin film is concerned. An entire electron diffraction is based on the surface structure. So there are two ways in which you can do the diffraction. One is called the this low energy electron diffraction, which is the topic of our lecture today. And second one is called the reflection high energy electron diffraction, which is called Reed technique. Not only the diffraction, you can also do what is called the microscopy. And there is something called atomic force microscopy, scanning tunneling microscopy, and then field emission microscopy or field ion microscopy. These techniques are basically to see the real space. Diffraction, on the other hand, remember, gives you always reciprocal space. Microscopy gives you the actual real space, right? You don't have to invert it. In the surface topography, if somebody is interested, then there is something called a stylus profilometry. Then you have scanning electron microscopy, and then your transmission electron microscopy, TEM. See, out of all these techniques which we have, which is projected here, only TEM, transmission electron microscopy, is the one which is used for both diffraction as well as for microscopy together. No other technique is used for both these things. But whatever the techniques which are listed here, requirement of clean vacuum, a clean surface, and UHV, ultra high vacuum, is must. Without that, this technique cannot be used, right? Except for like you can say AFM. Yeah, AFM can be used in ambient, but it has its own demerits. So I'm not interested in all of these techniques, but I will talk about basically two diffraction techniques, which is the lead and Reed techniques, right? So electron diffraction for thin film nanomaterials. So there are two techniques of electron diffraction which we are going to see in detail. One is known as the low energy electron diffraction, and the other one is called the reflection high energy electron diffraction, or the Reed technique. Now, historically, if we see, the Reed and lead technique are differ from each other by the projection which is shown here. I'll take up that particular slide later on. But before that, let me go back to the history of electron diffraction. In 1897, there is a discovery of electron beam that was by Thomson, which we teach in our undergraduate program. Okay, and then in 1924 there is a wave mechanics. It was developed at that time, and Louis Broglie, who first gave the this duality principle, where you have something called lambda is equal to h upon p. That is very relevant in case of electron diffraction. We shall talk about it later in detail, where he said that the matter particle can have wavelength, and similarly, a particle can possess some kind of a wave nature. So that is something which is used for electron diffraction. And in 1927, the proof of electron diffraction at atomic lattice was actually proved by two scientists, Davidson and Germer, who got Nobel Prize for their discovery of electron diffraction in 1937. And they actually first saw the electron diffraction image of the nickel 111 surface, and that's why they awarded the Nobel Prize. So if you see this electron diffraction, it has very, very long history behind it, but then it is very relevant in the present scenario of nanotechnology and the ULSI. Okay, right. Now, fundamentally, why electrons for diffraction? So that is a very basic question that one need to answer. And it is basically because of this particle wave duality, because electrons are matter particles, possess mass and occupy space. And you know that in diffraction, like it's an optical phenomena, and it goes well with the wave. Okay. Now, when you say electron for diffraction, this means that we are not talking about the matter electrons or particle electrons. We are essentially talking about its wave nature. And this if you just put the de Broglie hypothesis, you have lambda is equal to h upon p. Just now it is mentioned. The left hand side is the property of the wave, because the wavelength actually is a property of a wave, whereas this p on the right hand side is the property of a particle, right? But this equation actually relates the both the wave nature and the particle nature. Now then, if we take an example of, let's say, if you have an electron of 1 electron volt kinetic energy with a rest mass energy of 0.511, then the associated de Broglie wavelength is about 1.23 nanometer. And this wavelength is very, very important. Why? Because this 1.323 nanometer wavelength is almost equal to that of the interatomic distance of the crystalline material. Like you have done the experiment of, diffraction, people know the Fresnel and Fraunhofer, and you know that we also do in the SYBSc, we have an experiment on, let's say, grating to find the grating element. And the grating element is about, like you have 15,000 lines drawn on 1 inch. So if you just take the ratio of the 2.54 centimeter divided by 15,000, the answer comes out to be 0.0001694 centimeter. So you know that the condition for the diffraction is lambda by d has to be 1. So here in this case, for electron with some particular kinetic energy, it has the wavelength is about equal to that of the interatomic distance. So it is used as a probe to do the diffraction from the crystalline material. Yes. So this is the the simplified version of for these electrons, which is accelerated by any voltage V at the filament. Okay, and then you can using this particular equation of 0.1 into 150 by V raised to half. I mean, you can square root of this, and then if you just give the accelerating voltage about, let's say, 100 kilovolt or something, like in cathode ray oscilloscope, isn't it? The CRT, we know that CRT is basically used for this kind of thing, and the electron diffraction is also basically uses the same principle of the filament of the cathode ray tube, wherein the high voltage is applied to the filament and it will produce the number of electrons, and these electrons are having different energies, so they have different wavelengths. Right. What you require is a monochromatic beam of electron, that I shall talk about it in some of the slides now. Right. Now, popularly for diffraction, X-rays are fundamentally used. Right. But now we are talking about the electrons. So let us take the difference between what is the difference between X-ray diffraction and electron diffraction. X-ray diffraction is easy to understand because everybody knows Blake's law. Right. Your 2d sin theta equal to n lambda. When this condition is satisfied, this means that d has to be comparable with that of lambda. Okay, and in that case, X-rays wavelength is of the order of the interatomic distance. That is why X-rays are used for the diffraction experiment. Exactly in the same argument, the electrons, if they happen to have the same wavelength as that of the interatomic distance, we can use this electron also as a diffraction tool. But there are certain specific difference between the X-ray diffraction and the electron diffraction. The first one is the scattering power of atom is very small in case of this XRD, X-ray diffraction, whereas in the case of this electron diffraction, the scattering power is high. Why? Because it is mainly inelastic scattering. Okay. In the case of this X-ray diffraction, because it has very high penetration power, okay, it gives you good diffraction for the thicker films. Whereas for thicker films, the electrons are mostly absorbed. Okay, so they do not give any kind of a diffraction for thicker films. If the material is very thin in the thickness, okay, in that case, the electron diffraction is very satisfactory. And that is one of the drawbacks of this X-ray diffraction. Otherwise, X-ray diffraction, one can use it in the ambient, no need of vacuum. But then in case of electron diffraction, if you have very, very thin material, then the electron diffraction is the only choice that you have, because the X-rays do not give you sufficient scattering, and that is why the electron diffraction is powerful technique for this nanotechnology, because we are talking about the smaller scales of the material. Okay, now to understand the diffraction process, both whether it is X-ray diffraction or electron diffraction, I already mentioned earlier that it is the reciprocal space which one need to take care of in case of both X-ray diffraction and electron diffraction. The Bragg's law is the backbone of both of these technique, and the Bragg's law can be derived from these two diagrams which are shown here. On the left hand side, it is the XRD, X-ray diffraction. Your Ki is the wave vector of the incident beam of X-rays, and Kf is the wave vector of the final beam after scattering which has happened. And then there is a theta is the angle which is made incident, this incident angle of this beam of X-rays. So interatomic distance here, it is shown as the planar. You know, the distance between the two atoms is small d, and if we apply a trigonometry here, okay, it is very easy to understand that the constructive interference can happen only when you have this integer multiple of lambda, you know. So this theta, it has integer multiple of lambda. So you have n lambda is equal to twice d sin theta. That is how you derive the Bragg's law in case of this X-ray diffraction. The same argument actually holds true even in case of the electron diffraction. Here it is two-dimensional lattice is shown, and you know the capital D is the distance between the two atoms. And then here also this, you know, instead of this incident wave vector falling at an angle, now it is made perpendicular incidence. So this Ki is made incident at a perpendicular angle, and this at phi, angle phi, the diffraction or the scattering can happen of these monochromatic electrons, and you have Kf as your final wave vector. So here again, if you apply this trigonometry in this particular geometry, so you can find this n lambda of the electron is equal to d sin phi, where d is the interatomic distance and phi is the angle of scattering in case of the electron diffraction. So fundamentally, if you go back to, you know, the X-ray diffraction and electron diffraction, it is the same optical diffraction that we know. But the only thing is here, what we are considering the X-ray wavelength and the electron wavelength respectively. By both the cases, remember, monochromatic beam is first and foremost, right? Whether it is the electrons or whether it is X-rays. To create the electrons monochromatic, it has to be monoenergetic, because lambda is equal to h upon p is one equation. You have another equation also, and that is hc upon lambda. You know that E is equal to hc upon lambda. So if you make subject to lambda, then hc, h is Planck constant, c is the speed of light, divided by, you know, if you put E is the energy of the electron, then you can find that for monoenergetic means a constant E, you have lambda also constant. So that is a monochromatic beam of electron, and that is something very essential in case of the electron diffraction experiment that we do. Now there are two electron diffraction techniques, as earlier I mentioned in the title itself. One is called the lead, which is called the low energy electron diffraction. In this case, this incoming electron beam is less than 100 electron volt in energy, and it is made perpendicular to the sample. In that case of lead, you get undistorted reciprocal unit cell, but the real-time data acquisition is not possible. As against that, you have another process called reflection high energy electron diffraction. In this, the incoming electron beam is not about electron volt energy, but it is keV energy, kilo electron volt. So it's a 3 order of magnitude more than that of the lead electrons. And it is made incident at something called the glancing angle. I'll discuss that later on to the sample. In this case of read, you have a real-time data is possible. And in situ measurements can also be done. I shall elaborate this later on. But what is important here, you can see at the bottom, your two images are shown. You can see the lead image of the silicon. Now you see, if you refer to any of the standard solid state physics book, you know, silicon is said to be hexagonal structure, and everything is written based on the theoretical predictions and assumptions. Here you can see in this particular figure, which is shown, which is the actual photograph of the lead image of the silicon surface, you can see a perfect hexagonal of a silicon surface. And not only that, between the two vertex of this hexagon, there are 7 number of silicon atoms sitting there. So it's a perfect 7 by 7 kind of a reconstruction, surface reconstruction of the silicon atom. That much of power that this lead technique has, it gives you the direct imaging of the atomic surfaces which you have, right? And this is same as that of this. This is a lead image. This is a read image of the silicon surface. There also there is a signature of the 7 by 7 atoms. One can verify actually. Now there are certain these are good points about the electron diffraction, but there are certain peculiarities also about the electron diffraction. And what are these peculiarities? First of all, I mentioned that it is the electron diffraction is basically inelastic scattering. Now we know in inelastic scattering, you have some kind of energy loss because the laws of conservation of momentum and energy are not followed. It is quite obvious. Suppose if you are playing billiards, right? You have a target, or you are playing carom, let's say. So you have a target. So that is, assume that you have a one electron, that's a primary beam of electron, and then you have number of balls, okay, on the billiard ball table. So there, you know, there is a bunch of number of balls are there, about 10, 15 or something like that. So what happens is, if you hit with the target, if you hit this your incident beam, if you hit any one of them, then what happens? The energy is lost, okay, in the transferring the momentum actually to the other one subsequently. Similarly, it happens because the electrons are matter particles eventually. So they always undergo inelastic scattering. Unlike X-ray diffraction, they have elastic scattering. So basically laws of conservation are followed there. Now here, basically because of this inelastic scattering, you have three important sources which are which need to be considered. One is the Coulomb interaction between the electrons and the beam of the electrons in the crystal, giving rise to plasma oscillations and the electron energy loss. So that is the primary Coulomb interaction, is the primary loss mechanism. Then you have ionization of the core excitation of the individual atoms, which also happens when you have very high energy electron incident beam. So at that time this ionization may happen, and you have also the excitation because of this energy transfer. So the target atoms go into the excited states and liberate their energy later on. And then you have thermal diffusion scattering also, which is happening because of this cascade. Okay, because of the inelastic scattering which is happening, you have some kind of a cascading effect taking place in the target, and you have thermal diffusion which is happening. And then you have something called the double diffraction and extra reflection. So this is very acute in case of the multi-layer films. Just to give an example to you, just now I mentioned that the one example of thin film is the CD-ROM. Okay, all of you have seen CD and DVD, right? How do they write actually? They write in terms of the binary data, so 0 and 1s. Okay, all the data is in form of 0 and 1. And when we write the CD, usually we use the word burn, B-U-R-N, isn't it? Burn. We have burned the CD. And what is that actually? See, it is basically a CD, whether it is DVD or CD-ROM, you know, it has ferromagnetic and entoferromagnetic layers. There are total 7 layers, one on the top of the other. And these ferromagnetic layer usually are made up of iron and nickel alloy, and the antiferromagnetic layer is made up of this iron and platinum. Okay, so you have very thin coating of iron and nickel, on top of it iron platinum, and then again iron nickel, again iron platinum, again iron nickel, again iron platinum. So you know, like antiferromagnetic and ferromagnetic layers are there. Now what happens? Usually the ferromagnetic materials are having the individual spins aligned in one direction. Okay, so if you try to find out its resistance, it is metallic in nature, right? But as against that, if you try to find the resistance of this antiferromagnetic material which has random spins, okay, or cancelling each other's spins, they are usually high resistive material. So they do not conduct. So, you know, when you give some laser pulses or, you know, some kind of a laser light to this, what happens is, depending upon the intensity of the light which you give in terms of the binary modulated data, what happens is, you know, this the ferromagnetic spins are actually thrown out of their periodicity, and you can actually write your data permanently at that place. So, you know, this is how, you know, the CD-ROM works, where you have some kind of a, whenever you have to have one, you know, you understand that it is actually corresponding to the binary 1, and 0 corresponds to high resistance, and this high resistance and low resistance come from the magnetic layers, antiferromagnetic and ferromagnetic layers. Now, for example, suppose some industry, okay, or you have your own industry of manufacturing the CD or DVD, right? What would you like to see? You would like to see that how good this structure of this material is. Like, okay, whether it is cubic or hexagonal or whatever, okay, so you would like to see. So you do the electron diffraction experiment, because XRD will not be used there because the thickness is so small and X-ray penetration is high. So if you try to do this multi-layer, okay, multi-layer, because it is so many layers, 7 layers as I mentioned are there. So, you know, when you try to do the electron diffraction using that, you always find that because these two alloys, nickel and iron platinum, they have different crystal structures, so it gives you double diffraction in case of this electron diffraction. So that is again a peculiarity of this X-ray diffraction. And then you have a divergent beam and the Kikuchi lines, which are also part of this electron diffraction pattern, which with some example I am going to show you. Okay. Till this point, any question, any queries? So I will now start this low energy electron diffraction, which is called LEED, low energy electron diffraction. As it is mentioned earlier, this incident electron energy is range from 10 to 100 eV. Remember, if you choose any one of these energy, that energy has to be constant throughout. Okay, so you need a monoenergetic beam of electrons, and then it can probe up to, if you have this, then it can probe up to topmost 3 layers. When I say topmost 3 layers, I mean that monolayer. Now, what is monolayer? Monolayer means the thickness of that material should be equivalent to 1 unit cell parameter, lattice constant, 1 lattice constant of that particular material. Let's say silicon has 4.3 angstrom, it's unit cell parameter, lattice constant. Then I can say I have made one layer of the silicon if the thickness of this deposited silicon is equivalent to 1.3, okay, angstrom, right? That is called that. So this LEED primarily actually probe to topmost 3 layers, that is 3 monolayers. So about, let's say, about 15 to 20 angstrom only, okay, or about 3 to 4 nanometer, in other words, right? It is surface sensitivity because of this high scattering cross section for low energy electrons impinging, which is perpendicular to the surface. That is in the geometry only we will see that the electron has to fall perpendicular, made perpendicular incidence to the surface. The LEED always give you spot pattern to define two-dimensional lattice. It shows long range order on the surface, but it neglects the short range structural disorder. So that is one of the issues with the LEED, low energy electron diffraction. It is very powerful for the single crystal quality films that we call it as epitaxial films, but it is very difficult to interpret the LEED data if you have polycrystalline surfaces. Okay, so you know these are the some of the background of the low energy electron diffraction experiment. I shall speak about that later on. But this, as I said, all diffraction experiment gives you the reciprocal space, which we call it as the K space, right? And actually, what you get is the the G vector, which is 2 pi by lambda, or in other words, it is K actually, but G, this vector, which we call it as this reciprocal Brillouin vector, which is 2 pi by A, where A is the lattice constant, right? And then correspondingly, one can actually construct what is called the Ewald sphere, which is the hypothetical sphere of the reciprocal space, which is actually gives you idea about the diffracted beam that is coming from the surface, right? Because of this too much of technical solid state physics details, I am avoiding it and try to put across most simplest terminology which you may follow, right? Now, if you look at the LEED apparatus, the instrument, how it looks. See, basically what you require is a good electron gun, okay, which is shown here in this black hollow kind of a cylinder, which is in the planar direction. And then the sample is actually, the plane of the sample is perpendicular to the beam of electron. And once the diffraction takes place, you can see when the 2D sin theta equal to n lambda is satisfied, then you have the scattered electron going in all different directions. And just like in grating, we have first order diffraction, second order diffraction, exactly in the same way you get the diffraction because of the strong scattering cross section. But remember, since the incident energy beam is actually a low energy, so the diffracted one are even lower energy. So they are very difficult to reach to the particular this screen, this fluorescent screen. So you require some kind of accelerating grid which is positively biased so that the electron get attracted and get accelerated to hit the particular spot, and you get a spot pattern which is behind the electron gun. The screen is behind the electron gun. So this is how the LEED experiment is done. Remember, everything has to be done in very high vacuum, right? So this is another way of looking the front view of the LEED apparatus, low energy electron diffraction apparatus, where you have a fluorescent screen on which the electrons are actually made scattered, and they give you the spot pattern, the LEED spot pattern which we saw earlier of the silicon. And then you have two G1 and G2 are the accelerating grids, okay, which are necessary to accelerate the electrons. you can actually derive from the equation. This is called the equation of lead. You can derive this Bragg's law. This n lambda equal to d sine 2 theta in this case. Okay, so the geometry is shown here. This two-dimensional lattice is shown on the right-hand side, and you can apply just the trigonometric over here and try to find out how this equation has emerged. It is quite simple actually. This is called the lead equation. Right. Now you see the lead speed pattern, spot pattern gives you number of different information. Like initial experiment were done on the metal surfaces, such as let's say ferromagnetic nickel along its 100 direction. 100 is the Miller index or the Miller plane. You can say when the nickel is grown along 100, then if you it has the point lattice, which is shown by dense kind of 2x2 geometry over there, and the lead pattern is shown, corresponding lead pattern is shown at the right hand side. If you take the 2 atoms by 2 atoms of the nickel on the same surface, okay, you get the lead pattern, which is quite actually dense because it is K-space. So the number of 2x2 lattice actually comes together, and it gives you this kind of a lead pattern. And then if you take two different 2x2 area of this surface of nickel, then it gives you the third one, which we have here. But you can see that just by examining the lead patterns, you should be able to tell that which particular plane of this nickel actually takes part in this process of electron diffraction. So, and the orientation also can be understood based on this lead pattern, right? There are some of the analysis one can do for the lead images. The major features that you can get from the lead is the symmetry. You can find out the domain structure of the material. It gives you the reciprocal of the relative distances, so you can find out the order, short range and long range order of the crystalline material. Distance between the spot directly gives you the length of the unit cell. So in this diagram here, you can see here, this is a 7x7 reconstruction of silicon. And if you try to find out the distance between the two spots, that will be exactly equal to that of the silicon unit cell parameter. So that is very easy to analyze the measurements. These are some of the patterns, lead patterns again of the silicon I am showing here. The one which you can see at the center, this is a white color kind of a shadow. It is that of the electron gun, because the electron gun is exactly in front of the screen. So whenever you see any lead image, the electron gun will always be there as a shadow. There are bulk spot, and there are the higher order spots, which are shown by the black, this green kind of this arrows you can see, and the red are the bulk spots that you see. And between the two red spots, there are total number of 7 are there. So that is why we say it is a 7x7 reconstruction of the silicon 111 atom. So such a huge information you can get from this low energy electron diffraction experiment of the nanomaterials. Yes, domains, as I have said, if you take only pure silicon, and if you coat this silicon on let's say silver, okay, silver metal on silicon 111, then the pattern actually changes because they have different crystal structure. So this is how you can do the the interpretation of the domain structures which are there in this material. So now how this how can you determine the order of the surface? You have to set the distance between the spot one after the other. This is quite a detailed one, so I am not going into too much of depth of interpretation of that. But certainly, if somebody is interested, one can actually read the literature of determining the order of the surface using the interpretation of the lead surfaces, lead images. Now, if you want to find out the unit cell parameter, it is quite simple. You have a sample surface here shown by the vertical line here, and then this electron gun is at the right hand side, and it has usually this electron gun and the sample are in a curvature geometry like a sphere. This is a part of the sphere, and if I say r is the radius of that particular sphere in which this assembly is kept, then from the center, if I take the arc as a straight line, then I have x as the distance between the spot and the lead gun, okay, lead spot and the gun, and the diffraction which is happening at an angle phi. Okay, so you have n lambda equal to d sine phi, where lambda is given by 1.227 divided by root of v0. In the next slide I will say why this equation has come. 1.227 upon root v0. V0 is the accelerating voltage of the electron gun, because the monochromaticity of these electrons depend upon v0. Okay, and from this geometry you can see sine is the opposite side upon hypotenuse, so you have sine phi equal to x by r. So if I substitute this into this equation and making subject to d, so I can find out the interatomic distance d is equal to 1.227 upon root v0 r upon x. So you can see 1.227 by v0 is constant number. So if you know r and x, now variable is only x because r is also constant for a given geometry. Now how this 1.227 upon v0 has come is shown here. There is a shortcut to lambda calculation. Lambda is equal to h upon p, and we know it is h upon m into v because p is equal to mv. So if you put the v as 1/2 mv square equal to E into V0, that is a standard equation that we know in electrostatics, the kinetic energy of the electron. Then if you make subject to V only, you get a root of 2E into V0 by M actually in this equation. And if you just try to take this M inside the square root, you get a linear equations of root 2 ME into V0. So if I substitute all the numbers here, I have Planck constant in the denominator, which is 6.6 10 to the power minus 34 divided by, this everything is in MKS. So if I just put these numbers and try to do the arithmetic of this, I'll come up with this answer of 1.227 divided by V0 in the unit of nanometer. So this is a simple exercise by which, how this lambda has come into this particular equation that, that one can verify. Actually, so basically what you require is a monochromatic beam of electron, which largely depends upon V0. That is the filament voltage that you supply from outside, right? So using this equation, by substituting this, you can find out the interatomic distance and the unit cell parameter very easily. So interpretation of the data is quite simple and straightforward. So these are some of the case studies which I would like to share here. This first is the silicon, which is already been told. So if you have 35 electron volt energy of the electron beam, you get this kind of a blurred image. But if you increase the accelerating voltage or the incident beam energy, then you have about 65 electron volt. You can see the clarity from here to here. So what you are basically doing is, playing with lambda by changing the energy of the incident beam of electrons, right? If not only silicon, but even for different materials such as iron oxide. So these are the examples of iron oxide. Iron oxide exists in different valence state, right? Hematite, megamite, and pure FeO, iron oxide. So these are all different forms of iron oxide. And if you try to take this, the lead image of this iron oxide, how the crystal structure is actually changing, that you can see from these lead images, and one can actually very easily distinguish between the different these FeO phases, iron oxide phases. This is the iron oxide grown on the platinum metal, platinum 111 metal. As I said, this platinum and iron combination is used for CD-ROM, which we are using for long time now. So these different lead images are shown here. Okay. And so these are my conclusions for the lead images or the lead technique. If you have any question or any queries, I am happy to answer it. Then we move to the next part of this presentation, and that is called the reflection high energy electron diffraction, or RHEED. RHEED. It has come from this RHEED, reflection high energy electron diffraction. If you compare the previous lead, this RHEED has high energy electrons about 10 to 100 keV. There it was eV. Here it is keV. So in the kilo electron volt incident energy, it is made incident at a low angle, about 2 degrees. It can probe up to few tens of the monolayers. Monolayers, I already said, a monolayer means unit cell parameter of the material you want to deposit. Okay, it is made incident at a small grazing angle, and which is at sufficiently high elastic scattering cross section which you have. It is made, it gives you the oblique incidence, so it gives you the streak or the rod pattern, unlike the spot pattern in the case of lead. You can do the real time or in situ data acquisition. Here in this case, read, it is possible. Let me make an analogy. In situ એટલે શું આપણે થોડી વાર એ સમજીએ. You see, what do you mean by this word? Real time or in situ? In situ means that when you are making or fabricating some material, okay, you can simultaneously test it or characterize it. આ કેના જેવું છે? સપોઝ માનો કે રસોઈ બનાવતા હોઈએ આપણે, માનો કે ચા બનાવી, હે ને, કોઈ ઇમ્પોર્ટન્ટ ગેસ્ટ ઘરે આવ્યા છે અને કોઈ આપણને એમ કે ચા બનાવો, આપણે ચા બનાવવાની છે, તો એમાં આપણે એના ingredients, we will add the sugar, tea patti, adrak and this and that, and before serving, if the VIP guest is there, usually આપણે એને ટેસ્ટ કરીએ છીએ, બરાબર ને? એટલે કે મોળી થઈ છે, વધારે ખાંડ પડી ગઈ છે, આ ઓછું છે, આ વધુ છે, દૂધ ઓછું છે, કડક થઈ ગઈ, all these things. So that is, that testing you are doing simultaneously while preparing the tea. Remember, તમે બનાવતા આ જેટલું ચા માટે સાચું છે એટલું બધું જ બીજી ડિશ માટે પણ સાચું છે. કોઈ ગ્રેવી વાળી કોઈ સબ્જી બનાવતા હોય કે દાળ બનાવતા હોય, so in all these cases we know that you are preparing a dish and testing it there only, અને એ વખતે you have a chance of rectifying it also, isn't it? સપોઝ એવું ન કરી શક, આને ઇન સિટુ કહેવાય ભાઈ. આજે મેથડ થઈ ને, ટેસ્ટિંગ અને ફેબ્રિકેશન, સિન્થેસિસ એન્ડ ટેસ્ટિંગ આર ડન ટુગેધર. That is called in situ process or the real time process. Suppose એ નથી કરતા તો શું થાય? Then what you do is, suppose ખાંડ ભૂલી ગયા, ઘણીવાર આપણે દાળમાં પેલું મીઠું ભૂલી જઈએ, right? તો આવા વખતે શું થાય કે you have, if you serve it, in most cases you don't have a chance to rectify it, and most of the times you have to send it to recycle bin. Okay, અથવા તો એમાં ઉપરથી કંઈક નાખવું પડે, એ વસ્તુ અલગ છે, પણ આઈસીમાં આવું નથી થતું, તમે યાદ રાખજો. When you are preparing a particular transistor, at that time you cannot put it, again try to put it and try to synthesize. It will go to the recycle bin only, right? So this is called in situ. It is very, very useful. Those techniques for the characterization are highly advisable and suggested, which are done in situ. In situ એટલે મેં કહ્યું એ પ્રમાણે કે ફેબ્રિકેશન કરતા કરતા તમને એને ટેસ્ટિંગ કરવાનો ચાન્સ છે. Not only that, you can modify your synthesis technique accordingly and try to put it in order. Okay, otherwise the entire product will come and you find that it is not up to the mark, so you have no choice but to put it in the dustbin, right? So read, here in this case is in situ technique. Unlike the lead, in lead there is no scope of in situ measurement, but in the read you have a chance of doing the in situ measurement. In situ ખાલી electron diffraction માં છે એવું નથી. There are various characterization techniques in the material science, okay, or condensed matter physics, where you have a chance to do these in situ measurements of several materials. Okay, here this read oscillations of this, it will give you the thickness from 1 to 10 monolayer, which is very, very powerful. You can do the growth parameters, you can vary the growth parameters of the deposition during the process, right? And you can even do the polycrystalline and rough surface. Okay, you can do the analysis of that, which was not possible in case of this low energy electron diffraction, right? But there is an issue that since the electron energy, incident electron energy is of the order of keV, it can create some kind of a surface damage, particularly for the biological samples and soft polymers and other things. Okay, so that is one of the issues for the soft materials. This read being a high energy technique, it can create some kind of a surface damage of the material, and that sometimes you may not allow actually, because if you have a very rare sample of biological, let's say you want to do the DNA or some kind of RNA kind of analysis of the structure of the RNA or structure of the DNA. Okay, in that case read is not advisable because of this high energy technique, and it can create some kind of a damage to the material. Otherwise, it is much more powerful as compared to the lead technique. Right. So just like as I said, in case of this reed also, the philosophy is simple. Here also you have this reciprocal space or the brilliance zone that you need to correct this construct. Okay, that is a construction of this Ewald sphere. In the interest of the all of you, I don't go into technical details of this, which you can separately refer actually from the standard any solid state physics book, how this reciprocal space can actually give you the idea about the diffraction. Right. So here in this case, the schematic diagram of the reed is given here. Here it is a sample. The electron is not actually made incident at a perpendicular like a lead, but here it is made incident at a glancing angle. Glancing means it is just like a planar incidence. So the angle between the electron gun or the beam and the sample surface is almost about 2 to this is so you see the electron gun is making about only 1 to 3 degrees with that of this sample, right? It is falling almost in plane. Now that is why it can be used in situ, because usually what happens is in all of the thin film growth processes, the target means the material which is to be deposited is exactly made perpendicular to the substrate. Now in this case, this characterization is done in plane. Okay, so in that case there is nothing that can come. Otherwise, in case of lead, there is a competition between the target material and the electron gun, because they both are made perpendicular to the sample. So that is why lead cannot be used in situ. In case of reed, since the electron gun is almost in line of the sample, you can do the in situ measurements here. And most of the advanced techniques nowadays, commercial ones which are available in the market, you have this flexibility of the technique like PLD and reed together, this MB, molecular beam epitaxy, and reed together. So that is something very, very advantageous as far as the thin film growth is concerned, because you save a lot of time, money and energy actually by implementing the in situ measurements, right? Another advantage of this reed is, during the by adding some kind of a software, you can actually do this kind of what is called the reed oscillations, and it gives you idea about the growth of the film. Okay, so this is a substrate in the first particular picture here at the right hand side at the top, and then you start deposition, and after the deposition, some of the molecules, they arrive up to the substrate like this, and then you keep on doing more and more. So what happens, if you keep depositing more and more, you start getting this kind of oscillations of the intensity of electrons. And one of the very beautiful part about it is, the distance between the two oscillations, like in this looks to be sine wave kind of thing, damping oscillations. So the distance between the two consecutive trough or two consecutive crest here gives you the thickness of the layer material that you have. So this that is something very, very interesting, that when you have about let's say 5 to 6 angstrom thickness of the material, no technique in the world can measure such type of small thicknesses. Remember, about 5 angstrom or so, that is the monolayer. Measurement of such a small thickness is almost impossible. But this is an indirect way by which you can actually find out about even one monolayer thickness also. You can see the distance between the two, you have to simply find, and this is the x-axis is the distance here, and the y-axis is the electron density, the intensity at the detector, and you can find the distance between these two, which will give you the thickness of the film, which is actually impossible to measure otherwise by any other technique, right? So reed in this way is very powerful. It is used for in situ measurement. Also, this reed oscillation gives you idea about the thickness of extremely small thicknesses, which are not possible. In fact, I would say impossible to measure such a small thicknesses by any of the physical techniques that is available, right? I am just sharing some of my data, which I did at some different place when I was postdoc at some place in Japan. So these are the read images of some samples which I have made. That was on this MgO substrate. MgO is the substrate, and the nickel oxide we grow because it is lithium doped nickel oxide is a wide band gap p-type semiconductor, and it is transparent. There are very few p-type semiconductors which are transparent. Okay, and we wanted to make transparent transistor, completely transparent. मतलब કે કંઈક લખ્યું હોય ને એની ઉપર તમે આ ટ્રાન્ઝિસ્ટર મૂકો ને તો નીચેનું વાંચી શકો, which is not possible in case of silicon. Everybody knows the opaque material. Okay, so here we try to make it p-type and n-type material and try to make a junction of it. And any may read images liditi. So you can see this green color, the rod-like structure in these photographs. And these are the actual photographs of the sample. That this is a pure nickel oxide and this is lithium doped nickel oxide. And you can see the two lines, okay, at the bottom, like diverging lines here at the bottom of this particular with the central maxima. On both the sides, what you get, it's called the Kikuchi line, and it gives you the idea about the orientation. So the MgO substrate was 100 oriented, and the angle between these two lines, if you find, you can say whether the deposited nickel oxide is also about 100 or some different orientation. So that much accuracy you can find out, right? So these are some of the more case studies of read images. These are the silicon, and when the electron beam actually cover how many silicon atoms, it all depends upon that. And the electron beam is made, it's for larger period perpendicular to the beams. Okay, electron beam, you get this kind of image where you have a spot pattern, and here also the distance between the two spots. And these are, you can see the Kikuchi lines here in this particular photograph here. So there you can find out the lattice constant of the material which you deposit. See, why I am showing the data of the silicon is obvious, because silicon technology is the one which we are familiar, okay, in modern day technology, and the structure of the silicon is much more studied as compared to any other material. Of course, gallium arsenide is also there, but it is alloy. So, some kind of a complexity will be there in the interpretation of the data. That's why to avoid that 3-5 semiconductors, I'm using it. Another, classic semiconductor which we are right now using is the gallium nitride. All the lights that we use, તમે એક વસ્તુ સમજો કે ક્યારે કોઈ દિવસ એવું વિચાર્યું હતું કે એલઈડી છે એ ઘરમાં ટ્યુબલાઇટ ને રિપ્લેસ કરશે? એલઈડી છે એ ક્યારે હેડલાઇટ બનશે વ્હીકલની, SUV cars or modern cars that you know. Okay, see these white LEDs that you have and the white light that you use, they are all made up of gallium nitride material. One of the fantastic 3,5 compound, group 3 group 5 compound, which is used. Okay, and most of the studies of its periodicity and its mobility and other things have been carried out using the electron diffraction. So for characterization of these kind of materials, the light conversion efficiency of this gallium nitride is about 78%. આપણને પહેલા જ્યારે નાના હતા ત્યારે એવું જ હતું ને કે એલઈડી તો છે ઇન્સ્ટ્રુમેન્ટ ચાલુ છે કે બંધ એ જોવા માટે થાય એલઈડી નો ઉપયોગ. ક્યારે એલઈડી છે ઘરમાં આપણને ટ્યુબલાઇટ રિપ્લેસ કરશે એવું ક્યારેય નતું વિચાર્યું કે સ્કૂટરની કે આની હેડલાઇટ બનશે કારની. That we never thought of, but it is true. It is because of the developments which have taken place in semiconductor, wide band gap semiconductors such as gallium nitride. One of the fantastic material that So, these read data and the lead data of these compound semiconductors, gallium nitride and gallium arsenide, are also available in the literature. If it interests you, you can even see that. Okay, so these are very powerful techniques. Actually, gives you the complete structure of the material, detailed structure of the material, which even the X-ray diffraction is not sufficient to do, right? So I'm just giving you the overview of the read technique. Okay, the strength of the read, it is a robust technique. Okay, it allows one to observe the changes in the surface structure as a function of time. It is more sensitive to long range order than the on the surface. Its cost is less than that of the lead, low energy electron diffraction. But there are weaknesses also of this read technique. it is the diffraction pattern are harder to interpret than that of the lead. It is straightforward. Lead is a straightforward, and the quantitative analysis of the surface structure is quite difficult because of this interpretation of the data is quite difficult actually in case of this in comparison to that of the lead technique, and that is the one of the drawbacks of the read technique. Also, at times you get something called the surface charging effect for the non-conducting sample. If you're insulating sample, then the measurement of read is not very reliable. So that is also one of the drawback or disadvantage, you can say, of this read technique. Okay. Otherwise, it is very powerful technique for epitaxial and polycrystalline material. So I summarize here that the lead and read are powerful tools to study the surface structure of the thin films, particularly the nano materials thin films. They both have their own merits and demerits, but read has the edge over lead in many ways. Like it can do the in situ measurements or real-time changes. The polycrystalline epitaxial, that one of the issue which was one of the big drawback of lead, that it can do only single crystal quality thin films analysis, whereas the read can give you both structural information about the polycrystalline material as well as for the epitaxial quality films. And then you can do the depth profiling using the read because it is high energetic electrons. It is less expensive, so that cost is also one of the advantage of having this read. Okay, but there is a common part is the clean surface and UHV are must criteria for both these techniques. Without that, you cannot do, because if you don't have any UHV, in that case, these electrons get absorbed by the medium only. Okay, and they will not reach to your surface of the material. So UHV is must criteria in both this. So there are various advances which are taken place in the ultra compact size electron guns. Recently I have seen some of the companies have made these electron guns as small as the cigarette packet. Okay, that is something very this has made a lot of compactness in the particular deposition system. This is quite useful, this compact size of the electron guns. Otherwise, usually electron guns occupy huge space because it requires a big power supply, right? Because you need about 100 kilovolt of power supply to generate the electrons of sufficiently high energy to operate the read machine. But because of these large developments which have happened in the technology, you have compact size electron guns are available in the market, and the efforts are made to correlate the microscopic tools which is extended for this quantitative surface analysis of the several materials. So these are so that's what I wanted to share with you. These are some of the questions that the how an electron can diffract. You can estimate the wavelength of an electron having energy of 10 keV, the difference between XRD and the electron diffraction. And like electron diffraction is better suited for thin film analysis than that of XRD, which I was already justified. Okay, you can just talk about the lead technique separately, and the merits and demerits and all that, and why this lead cannot be used for in situ measurements. I have given the answer for that, because the target material and the substrate are actually they are just in line, so lead cannot be used for in situ measurements. And what are the in situ measurement techniques that I already mentioned about it. Yeah, so I think I should stop here, and then I just welcome the questions from any of the participants which are here present here in this meeting. There are two ways of looking into this. As I said, this responsibility was given to me as an opening batsman. I don't know how far I could able to convince you with this. So either you understood everything, or it was not understandable. There are two possibilities. Yes. Am I connected?
First question: how electron can diffract means? What do you mean? I have to show diagram or whatever?
Yeah, of course, because see, first of all, when we say electron diffraction, obviously, the electrons are being particles and diffraction. This is like a 12th standard question that the diffraction process is actually goes with wave, isn't it? So how the wave and the particle duality. So you have to somehow include the de Broglie hypothesis. So not diagram. You don't need to draw the diagram, but you can certainly explain from the point of view of the de Broglie hypothesis, lambda equal to h upon p or h upon mv, and just say that massive particles, massive particles can have wavelength.
Yes, that 0.157, something
True.
like that.
Yes.
Davison-Germer experiment can be some explanation regarding.
So basically, Davidson-Germer experiment. Yes.
There is a difference between theoretical and experimental values are different.
Yeah. So of course. So there are certain drawbacks that one need to consider when we talk about the electron diffraction. But the primary thing is that if you can just have a monoenergetic beam of electron, then the diffraction from the electron beam is very much possible. Okay, to get the crystal idea about the crystallography. Yes.
So can you repeat, using lead pattern, how can one determine that unit lattice parameter, unit cell parameter?
From the
question number 6, using lead pattern, how can one determine cell parameter?
Yeah. So this I have already explained. Just
repeat.
Yes. So my slides are visible now? No.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. So here it is. You can see here on this particular slide. Let's say slide number 34. It is written here, lead analysis to determine the unit cell parameter, right?
Okay.
Look at the title, to determine the unit cell parameter, isn't it? Okay. So in this, once you know D, directly you can find out there is a relation between the ABC and this capital D, right? So from that, for cubic structure, it is A upon root of h square plus k square plus l square, and which is actually the summation gives you D. So likewise, using this particular formula, D equal to 1.227 upon root V0 R upon X. Okay, one can find out the unit cell parameter for any crystalline material. So basically the answer lies here in this particular slide. That's why I said that how this equation has come. It is basically from the n lambda equal to 2d sine phi, which is the Bragg's law, and we make subject to D. So this is and this particular number will come, and sine phi according to this geometry is x upon r, right? So except for this x, all others are constant, and x is nothing but the distance of this spot pattern, the distance between these spot patterns in the lead image. So once you get this lead spot pattern, you should be able to calculate D, right? And one can find out the unit cell parameter from that.
Sir, he is asking a question in the comment box. That's why I call him. The question is: can GIXRD can be used for thickness measurement?
GIXRD can be used for not for thickness measurement. It can be used for smaller thickness materials. Okay. Thickness measurement के लिए GIXRD is not used. GIXRD used for very, very small thickness thin films. But again, if you are really having a thickness of the order of monolayers, as I have said, even GIXRD is not useful. Only electron diffraction only is to be used. Only electron diffraction can be used. GIXRD cannot be used for few monolayers film. Okay, it doesn't give you any diffraction.
What about X-ray reflectance?
X-ray reflectometry. X-ray reflectometry, again, as I said, primarily the X-rays are the powerful beam, of the with high penetration. So the moment you use this X-rays, when you have monolayer kind of a thickness, I doubt whether it will give you sufficient. But yes, it can be complementary to the read or lead kind of experiment. It gives you idea about that. But again, it is an indirect technique. Reflectivity one can use. So many people have used the reflectometry, but compared to reflectometry, this technique is much more accurate, you can say. The electron diffraction is much more accurate, particularly the lead and read.
Going to end our session, and thank you so much, Dr. U.J. Joshi sir, for sparing your very valuable time with the participant